Hi YouTube, welcome to another edition of Horror Hounds, and for this video I'm going to be offering an analytical review of the most disturbing movie I've ever seen, Salo, or the 120 Days of Sodom. Before I get into anything, I just want to present some discretionary etiquette in the sense that I will be talking about some rather disturbing, distasteful and abhorrent themes which may be upsetting or offensive. If you aren't a fan of extreme horror or shock cinema, I would recommend skipping this video. I've said this before, but this is a horror channel, although I'd hate for anything I discuss to leave someone with negative connotations or upset them in any way. The last piece of cautionary housekeeping, if you like, is to say that I do not recommend watching Salo. There's no endorsement from me to track this movie down and watch it. This was the most grueling and hellish movie experience I've ever endured, and I wouldn't expect others to martyr themselves through such dark material. Like the film itself, this video will not be for everyone. It's aimed at those who have seen it, those who have an opinion on it, or for those who are lingering with feelings of curiosity and those procrastinational whims to watch this behemoth of sick cinema, a group of people who I know is somewhat substantial. So, if you're still here, thank you, brace yourself, and we'll get into it. So, Salo is an Italian movie that was made in 1975. It was the final film to be directed by Paolo Pasolini, a renowned, although somewhat troubled and controversial filmmaker. He was also a writer and poet. He will be murdered about 3 weeks after the film's release, something I'll get into later in the video. It features a cast of mainly unknowns, and that's something else I'll get into later in the video as well. The only notable name in this film for me, other than Pasolini, was Ennio Morricone, who served as a consultant for the film's soundtrack. So, the basic premise for Salo is it takes place in a quiet Italian village in 1944, a time when the village would have been in Nazi occupancy, and a group of wealthy, upper-class, libertine gentlemen, and I use that term loosely, round up a group of adolescent men and women and subject them to 120 days of mental, physical and sexual torture, mainly for their own enjoyment, entertainment and arousal. What follows is a dizzying spiral of bizarre ceremonies, violence, rape, degradation, murder and the infamous Circle of Excrement segment. And if you don't know what that is, trust me, you're okay. There's no story development, no character development, no logic, reasoning, climax, comeuppance or closure. The film commences with its depraved parade of activities and only gets more disgusting, shocking and frankly incoherent as it grinds along. As the 2 hours slink away, reason, reality and the sanity of the perpetrators, victims and indeed the viewer begin to bleed into a disintegrating haze of frightening obscurity. As the movie comes to a quiet and uneasy close, we see voyeuristic shots of the victims being murdered in brutal and unforgiving ways. Although I've seen such scenes in other movies, the fact that this movie had beaten down my spirit for the last 2 hours meant that the heinousness of these acts haunted my psyche much more than any gore-filled slasher or Saw imitator could do. In fact, despite its violent and gross-out content, Salo doesn't have the feeling of an exploitation or grindhouse movie. There's no B-movie sentimentalities here. The film is actually a very classy affair, making its nature all that more troubling. The threat in Salo comes not from mad axemen or slimy monsters or rotting zombies from beyond the grave, but from dignitaries in suits, rich people who have more power than you, who are more intelligent than you, who are more cultured than you are, but for whatever sick reason are insatiated by your pain, anguish and humiliation. and as this unfolds, they look on with pride and glee. Another aspect of Salo that disturbed me more than what I was prepared for was the script and the dialogue. There are a number of scenes where aging women recount some horrifyingly depraved acts that they found themselves being a part of, all at a time when they were underage, I may add. And they describe these with a warm fondness. They essentially look back at their own abuse as glorious memories. It's so weird and uncomfortable to listen to. I found myself squirming in my seat, praying for these scenes to end. The effects of these story time segments, if you will, leave you feeling sick, repulsed and angry. Worst of all, it usually doesn't end there, as the theme of these stories usually manifests themselves in the subsequent acts that are committed on the victims, with the dignitaries having new inspiration from what they've just heard. This is the bleak and merciless cycle that the film operates in. The last factor to just add a touch of nauseating claustrophobia is the look and cinematography of the film. You'd expect a film that takes place in a lavish mansion set in the Italian countryside to exude a rich and colourful aura, vibrant with antiquitous decorations and ancestral charm. Instead, what we're faced with is a very bleached out, faded and pallid look, exasperating the feelings of worthlessness, helplessness and sorrow. This isn't a horror movie soaked in blood and guts, it's more of a cold, grey palette. Now you may be saying, but horror hands, surely in the murky world of extreme horror, this isn't worse than any of the other contenders. What elevates Salo over other legitimately shocking movies such as a Serbian film, Cannibal Holocaust, Martyrs, Faces of Death, etc.? And whilst I can accept any of these movies as being somebody's number one in this category, none of these have the skill of immersion that Salo has. These kind of movies tend to operate by coming at us with predetermined set pieces that are blunt and harsh and designed to shock, and they do this very well. Salo is different. Salo quietly immerses you in its perverted world. The horrors and the film's true nature insidiously meld themselves around you through uncomfortable, disturbing and downright disgusting scenes which play out in a subtly regimented nature. It's a tough watch from the start, but it's not until about an hour and a half that you actually start to notice that the line between cohesiveness and sheer insanity can no longer be identified, and that is a terrifying realisation. Add to that the claustrophobic feel and the countless scenes of violence and sexual degradation, and you have, in my opinion, the most disturbing movie ever made. Now, as I was watching it, I kept thinking, and I've never thought this before, but I kept thinking, how did they get anyone to star in this film? Like, who saw the script and who saw what this film was about and thought, that's a film that I want to be part of? And the creepy thing is, when you try and look up the people that were involved in this movie, very few of them had or have a movie career. It was very hard to find any information on the people that are in this film. Some of the people I couldn't find anything on. There's only one person in this that I recognised. He played one of the gentlemen, and he would have a minor role 4 years later in Caligula. I recognised him from that. But there's nobody else in this that I know, and there's nobody else really that I can look up and pinpoint who they were, which just adds to the whole troubling nature of the film. Apparently the men who played the four dignitaries knew Pasolini in other fields, mainly literature, and the younger people who played the victims were models and were therefore more comfortable with the prolonged nudity and things like that. And from what I've heard, this was actually quite a fun film to make. It was a rather jovial set and everybody got on really well and had a good time. I don't know whether to be happy about that or even more disturbed, quite frankly. And again, from the small amount of rhetoric that I've read, quite a few of the actors said that they didn't realise while making the film just how shocking it was going to be. Apparently, Pasolini put a lot of the film together behind the scenes in the editing room. I'm not too sure about that personally. I mean, they were there and they delivered their lines, so I don't know why they didn't know what was going on. But I take that for what it was. Now, about 3 weeks after this film's release, Pier Paolo Pasolini was murdered. He was found dead on a beach. He'd been run over multiple times and had been beaten with a metal pole. Now, it seems like there's still some discussion as to the true nature as to how he died. He was involved in quite a lot of strong political and social groups, and he wasn't afraid to voice his disdain and criticism towards certain political and social ideologies. And there is discussion that he was actually taken out in more of a organised hit by people who thought that he was criticising them. The other theory that I've heard is that he was actually being extorted by somebody working alone, and somebody was actually charged and convicted with his murder on these grounds. So for the sake of argument, it does seem like this is the most factual and likely theory as to what happened. But I've also read as well that actually the response and the outrage to this movie was so strong, and certain people took this as a criticism and commentary into the sort of negatives of politics and governments and consumerism, that he was actually killed in response to the criticism that he was purveying with this film. I'm not too sure about that theory myself, but that does bring me nicely to the next and last point that I wanted to make about Salo. So, as I've said, whereas I don't recommend watching this movie, it is rather fascinating to read about this film and the legacy it has, and some of the theories that people have into the film's true meaning. There's a lot of really good articles and literature where people state, much more eloquently than what I can, that this was really Pasolini's commentary on certain themes such as political corruption, fascism, consumerism, class struggles and things like that. And they quite convincingly, in a lot of ways, link the things that go on in this film to their theory of how it was sort of a social and political commentary. So, for example, the fact that these four nameless upper class men control and do whatever they want to these younger, powerless victims was Pasolini's criticism of authoritarian government parties doing whatever they want, being able to control people without any kind of consequence and act on any kind of whims that they had, no matter how harmful or inappropriate to lower class people it was. The circle of excrement segment was, in theory, Pasolini's criticism of consumerism and him saying that people will consume anything, no matter if it's garbage or no matter if it's how wasteful or damaging it is to themselves and others around them. And generally a lot of people feel that this was just Pasolini's way of sticking his fingers up at the world around him. He wasn't happy with how he saw culture and society moving along at the time. I don't think he was too happy with how some of his films have been used in sort of parodies and exploitative ways. And this was just his way of showing what happens if people are given free rein to do whatever they want without consequence, and how people around them suffer and things like that. All very fascinating stuff. And really, there seems to be two camps of people when it comes to this movie. There are those that see it as a genius masterpiece with all these social and political commentaries. And then there's those that just look at this as a total vile piece of trash that shouldn't be seen at all. For me, it's kind of hard to really kind of classify this as either one of those things. I do kind of lean to the fact that this is just a vile piece of trash because it was such a difficult and disgusting thing to watch. But at the same time, knowing a little bit about Pasolini and who he was, it's hard to think that he wouldn't want to give some kind of message or commentary in what he did. For me, as I say, it's just such a disturbing movie that kind of overrides the things he may have wanted to convey, which is a little bit unfortunate. But if you said to me, is Salo a good film? That is a resounding yes. Is it a film that I want to revisit? Absolutely not. But whether you think this is a misunderstood masterpiece or a vile piece of trash, there is no denying the power that this movie has to shock and repulse and send you to a very dark place. Like I say, this was my idea of movie watching hell. And if hell does exist, you can guarantee that this movie plays down there on repeat. Thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned for more videos.